All right, so here's the deal. I'm 57 years old, living in Florida with my younger wife, Jessica, and our two kids, Danny and Ava. I guess when you hit your late 50s, you've seen a lot of crazy stuff. And for me, the military kind of hardened me up to the point where I think I'm invincible or something. That whole mindset of I've survived worse really kicks in, especially when you're facing a storm. When the news about Hurricane Milton started rolling in, they were all saying it was going to be a rough one. Evacuation orders were going out left and right, but I wasn't having it. Something about leaving my house behind just didn't sit right with me. I've always been the type to stand my ground, probably a remnant of my military days. Once a Marine, always a Marine, right? Jessica wasn't thrilled with the idea. Maybe we should leave, she kept saying, her voice carrying that hint of worry I've come to know too well. She's 15 years younger than me, and sometimes I wonder if that's why she always seems to think a little more rationally than I do in these situations. She's got that balance between knowing when to fight and when to run, something I never quite mastered. But leaving felt like giving up. This house, we put years into it. Sweat, blood, and more than a few arguments went into making it our home. Walking away from that, even if it was temporary, just felt wrong. Plus, we've got the kids, and I didn't want to scare them by acting like this was something we couldn't handle. So I told her, "Babe, we're staying. We'll be fine." She gave me that look. You know the one. Half disbelief, half resignation. "All right," she sighed. "But if this thing gets worse, we're packing up and going, no arguments." So here we are, sitting in the middle of the house, the wind howling outside like a freight train. The kids are in the living room, pretending to watch cartoons, but I can see the nervous energy in their little faces. They've never seen anything like this before, and honestly, neither have I. But I've been through combat zones, so how different can it be, right? I try to stay calm, for them, for Jessica, and yeah, maybe a little bit for myself. I know what it's like to be in situations where you feel like everything is falling apart around you, but you just have to hold on. That's what I'm doing now, holding on. I can hear the wind tearing at the roof, the sound of the shutters rattling like they might just fly off at any second. And yet, here I am, sitting in my chair like this is just another day. Old habits die hard. The military trained me to survive in the toughest of situations, and right now, I guess I'm banking on that training to get us through this. Jessica keeps looking at me like I'm crazy, but there's something in her eyes too. Something that says maybe she trusts me enough to believe we'll be okay. Or maybe she's just hoping I'm right, and we won't regret staying behind. As the night wears on, the storm isn't letting up. It's gotten louder, more violent. I can feel the whole house trembling now, like it's hanging on for dear life. We've still got power for now, but I don't expect that to last long. I'm already prepping in my head for when it goes out, because when it does, things will get real. I keep telling myself, it's fine, we've been through worse. But deep down, I know this is different. This isn't a battlefield with an enemy I can see. This is nature, and you can't fight that. You just have to ride it out. So about my neighbor Rick. Yeah, he's a bit of an odd one. Single guy, around Jessica's age, which already adds a bit of tension, at least for me. He's always been one of those people you just can't figure out. Keeps to himself mostly, but then out of nowhere, he'll start talking your ear off about the most random things. Weather patterns, conspiracy theories, and once I think the best way to preserve canned goods. Like I said, strange. Rick was all packed up and ready to evacuate when this whole Hurricane Milton thing started heating up. Saw him loading his SUV with bags the other day, like he was getting ready for the apocalypse. I figured he'd be the first one out when the warnings came, but nope. Turns out he decided to stick around just like us. Maybe it's a pride thing, who knows? Could be he didn't want to leave behind whatever girls he was thinking about bringing over. Yeah, about that, he's always got some new girl coming over, never anyone regular. It's not like he's running a revolving door or anything, but I notice. I mean, the walls aren't that thick, you know? But the strange thing is, he never seems to be in any kind of real relationship with them. They come and go, but there's no emotional connection from what I can tell. It's more like he's just trying to fill the quiet in his house. Jess has talked to him a few times, and sometimes they communicate a little closer than I'd like. It's not like I think anything's going on, but you know how it is. I notice. She's friendly with everyone, one of the things I love about her. But with Rick, there's just something that makes me pay a little more attention. No examples come to mind right away, and maybe I'm just reading into things. But it's one of those nagging feelings, the kind that sits in the back of your head and never quite goes away. Anyway, back to Rick. Once he realized we were staying too, he actually came over to chat for a bit. He looked surprised, like he didn't expect us to stick around. "You sure you're not getting out of here?" he asked me, standing there on my porch with his arms crossed, a little too casual given the situation. "We're staying," I told him. "I've been through worse. This storm? We'll manage." Rick gave me this long look, kind of sizing me up like he was trying to figure out if I was just being stubborn or if I really believed we'd be fine. Eventually, he just nodded, almost like he respected the decision, or maybe like he didn't want to be the only one around who wasn't evacuating. "Well, if you need anything, let me know. I've got a generator and plenty of supplies. Might as well hunker down together, right?" I nodded back, and that was that. He went back to his place, and I could see him through the window, still fiddling with his bags, like he wasn't quite sure whether he should unpack them or not. I couldn't help but wonder why he didn't just leave, considering he was all ready to go. But I guess some people, even the ones who seem a little off, don't want to feel like they're running away from something. As night fell and the storm picked up, I couldn't help but glance out the window a few times, seeing the faint glow from Rick's place next door. He's alone over there, while we're all packed into one room. I think about what it must be like riding out something like this with no one but yourself for company. Maybe that's why he always has those girls over, just to keep the loneliness at bay. I remember few strange situations with Rick and Jessica. A few months back, Rick invited us and another family over for a barbecue. Now, I'll admit the guy can grill. He might be strange, but he knows his way around a set of tongs. Anyway, he had one of his girls with him that day. Don't ask me her name. I can't keep up with them. She was nice enough, I guess. Quiet. Kept to herself for the most part. So, we're all out in Rick's backyard, tossing back a couple of beers, chatting about nothing in particular. The usual small talk, sports, weather, whatever. At some point, the women, Jessica, Rick's girl, and the wife from the other family, volunteered to help him with something in the kitchen. They were probably preparing sides or grabbing more drinks. I didn't think much of it at the time, just figured they were being polite. But after a little while, I realized it was taking longer than it should have. You know how it goes. Sometimes you lose track of time, but this was different. Something just didn't feel right. So, I got up to check on them, figuring they were probably caught up in conversation and just needed a reminder that we were all still out there. I headed inside, expecting to find them chatting around the kitchen island or putting together some salads. But when I stepped into the kitchen, it was quiet. Rick's girl was there, along with the other wife, but no Jessica. I looked around, didn't see her, and then I noticed something. Rick wasn't in the kitchen either. Now, I didn't jump to any conclusions right away. I mean, it's a house, people move around, no big deal, right? But still, something about it stuck with me, like the air was a little heavier than it should have been. That's when I walked into Rick's living room. And there they were, Rick and Jessica. They were standing close, too close if I'm being honest. Rick had this old photo album open on his coffee table, one of those dusty things filled with pictures from his solo trips. He was showing it to Jess, pointing out some photo of a mountain or beach or whatever, but it wasn't the photos that caught my attention. It was his arm, wrapped casually around her waist. I stood there for a moment, just watching. Jessica didn't seem uncomfortable, but she didn't exactly pull away either. They were in their own little bubble, chatting quietly, and it didn't take long for them to notice me. Rick looked up first, kind of startled, like he hadn't expected anyone to walk in. Jess noticed me right after, and she pulled back a little, giving Rick a polite smile and stepping away from him. "Hey, just showing Jess some pictures from my trips," Rick said, his voice a little too casual for my liking. He acted like it was nothing, just two friends sharing a moment over a photo album. "Right," I said, my voice probably sharper than I intended. "Everything okay in here?" Jessica shot me a look, one I couldn't quite read. "Yeah, just catching up. Rick's got some amazing travel stories." She said it like it was no big deal, like I was being paranoid for even thinking anything was out of place. But that image, Rick with his arm around her, them standing so close, stuck with me. It wasn't like I could just brush it off, no matter how much I wanted to. I didn't say anything more about it that night, and neither did she. The barbecue went on, we had our food, a few more drinks, and then we went home. But that little moment, it's been sitting there in the back of my mind, gnawing at me ever since. I've told myself 100 times that it was nothing, just a friendly gesture. That's the rational part of my brain talking, the part that doesn't want to overreact or cause drama, where there isn't any. But then there's the other part, the one that remembers the way they looked together, how comfortable they seemed. That part whispers to me late at night, making me wonder if there's more to their friendship than either of them is letting on. Thinking back on it, that barbecue wasn't the only time something felt off. There was another situation a few weeks later, and it's been eating at me just the same. It was a Saturday afternoon. Jessica had noticed that Rick's girl from the barbecue, the quiet one, had come over to his place again. I didn't think much of it at first, figured it was just one of those short visits, maybe to grab something she'd left behind or whatever. But then Jess mentioned that she needed to ask the girl something. I can't even remember what it was now. Probably something trivial like a recipe or if she could borrow some book they talked about. You know how those conversations go. Anyway, Jessica said she'd pop over real quick, and I nodded, barely paying attention. Figured she'd be back in a few minutes, maybe 10 tops. But time kept ticking, and before I knew it, it had been well over half an hour. I started to feel that knot in my stomach again, like something wasn't right. When she finally came back, she looked different, not in an obvious way, but there was this kind of energy about her. She was flustered, but not in a bad way. You know that look someone gets when they've had an unexpectedly good time, like they're still buzzing from it? That's how Jess looked. A little too happy, a little too excited, like something had stirred her up while she was over there. I asked her, "What took so long?" She just shrugged. "Oh, we ended up talking. Rick showed me some stuff from his last trip. You know how he is, always going on about his adventures." Her explanation was so casual, so breezy, but it didn't sit right with me. I felt that familiar unease creeping in, the same kind I'd felt at the barbecue. I mean, what was it about Rick's damn trips that kept pulling her in? And why did she look like she'd just had the most fascinating conversation of her life? "I thought you just needed to ask the girl something," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, but I could feel the frustration building up inside. "Yeah, I did," she replied, still smiling like everything was normal. But then we all just ended up talking for a while. I didn't say anything at first, just nodded, but it was eating at me. I could feel myself getting worked up over it, and I didn't even know why. Maybe it was just the idea of her being over there with Rick in his space, laughing and chatting like they were the best of friends. And the worst part? She didn't seem to see anything wrong with it. Eventually, I couldn't keep it in. "Why do you always spend so much time over there?" I asked, a little sharper than I intended. She looked at me, taken aback. "What do you mean? It's not like I'm over there all the time." "No," I said, "but every time you go, it's never just a quick visit. You always end up staying longer than you say you will. And you come back different." "Different? What are you talking about?" She shot back, clearly irritated now. I tried to explain, but the words felt clumsy coming out. "I don't know, Jess. It just feels like every time you're with him, you come back all excited, like something happened that you're not telling me about." She sighed, her patience clearly wearing thin. "Look, Rick's a nice guy, all right? We talk. That's it. Nothing more. You're making this into something it's not." "I'm not making it into anything," I said, but we both knew I was. I was making it into something in my head, connecting dots that may not even have been there. But that look on her face, that nervous excitement, it didn't feel right. The argument didn't go anywhere, just one of those small fights that leaves you both annoyed and not talking for a while. She went about her business, and I let it drop, but the whole thing stuck with me. Looking back now, I realize those were the bells. The warning signs I should have paid attention to, the moments that told me something was wrong between Jess and Rick. But I didn't do anything. I just let it slide, convincing myself it was nothing. I guess it's easier to ignore the sound of those bells than to face what they're really ringing for. And all of it, every ignored moment, every time I brushed it off, it led to what I now know as Jess's crazy cheating. The second day of the storm, things finally started to calm down. The wind, which had howled like a wild beast through the night, eased up to a dull roar. It was one of those strange pauses in the middle of a storm when everything feels too still, too quiet. We all needed a break, so Jess, the kids, and I stepped outside to see what kind of damage the neighborhood had taken. The air was cool and damp, and the streets were littered with debris, branches, bits of roofing, a few knocked-over trash bins. In comparison to the chaos from the night before, it felt peaceful, almost surreal. We walked together, taking in the wreckage, checking on the house, making sure nothing was completely destroyed. Thankfully, it wasn't too bad. Some broken tree limbs, a few loose shingles, but the house had held up. After a while, we made our way back home. As soon as we walked in, Jess glanced down at her phone. "I just got a message from one of the neighbors," she said, her voice casual, like this was no big deal. "They asked me to check something in their backyard. Must have left something behind before the storm. I didn't think much of it." "You sure? In this weather?" She shrugged. The winds died down for now. I'll be quick. And with that, she headed out. Minutes passed, then more, and before I knew it, she was gone longer than needed. That calm after the storm didn't last long, and neither did my patience. As the minutes ticked by, something inside me started to churn. It wasn't just suspicion this time. It was a feeling so strong that it was almost physical, like a weight in my chest, dragging me toward a conclusion I didn't want to face. I knew something was happening. I could feel it in my gut, in the way Jess had left, in the way she hadn't come back yet. I stood there in the house, pacing, my heart beating faster with each step. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. My instincts, honed from years in the military, told me it was time to act. And for the first time, I listened to them. I headed straight for Rick's house. Anger was coursing through me, each step faster than the last. I wasn't thinking clearly. Hell, I wasn't thinking at all. I just knew I needed to see for myself, to confirm what my gut had been screaming at me for months, what those bells had been trying to tell me. When I got to his door, I didn't knock. I just walked in, too furious to care about anything but what was on the other side. And as soon as I stepped inside, I heard it. The unmistakable sound of Rick f***ing my wife. It felt like time stopped for a second, and in that moment I saw red. I don't remember much of what happened after that, just flashes. I was in the living room, then I was on Rick. I hit him hard, harder than I've hit anyone in years. The first punch knocked him off balance, but the second one, right to his mouth, took out 2 of his teeth. He swung back, caught me across the cheek, and that's when things got really ugly. We were going at it blow for blow. I remember feeling the satisfying crack as I hit him in the eye, watching him stumble back. But Rick wasn't backing down either. He caught me with a right hook that made my head spin, and that's when I realized we were evenly matched. Neither of us was going to stop until one of us couldn't stand anymore. Then, out of nowhere, Jess screamed. She jumped in between us, pushing us apart, her eyes wide with panic. "Stop! Just stop!" she shouted, her voice desperate. Rick and I were both breathing hard, blood trickling down my lip, his face swollen, and his eyes starting to turn black. For a second, everything was silent except for the sound of our heavy breathing and the distant rumble of the storm outside. Jess stood between us, her hands up, like she was trying to hold back 2 animals. And in that moment, I realized just how far things had gone. It wasn't just the storm outside that had torn everything apart, it was the storm inside us too. For a moment, it felt like we might just walk away from it all. Jess stood there between us, her breath ragged, eyes wild, and Rick was hunched over, clutching his side where I'd landed a solid punch. It was like everyone was waiting for someone else to break the silence, to sweep it all under the rug like nothing had happened. But I wasn't about to let that happen. I wasn't just going to let them dodge what was really going on. Not this time. "You think this is over?" I said, my voice low but deadly, cutting through the tension like a knife. "You think you could just brush this off, pretend it didn't happen?" I looked right at Jess, and she flinched, her eyes darting away from mine like she couldn't bear to face me. "I know there's more. I know this has been going on for a while." Rick didn't say anything, but the way he shifted uncomfortably told me I was right. Jess stayed frozen, her hands still half raised like she was ready to stop another fight, but I could see it. The guilt was already written all over her face. "What? You thought I wouldn't find out? You thought I wouldn't notice the late messages, the way you've been sneaking off, the way you come back looking all different?" My words came out sharp, one after another, each one hitting like a blow. Jess's face flushed, and for a second, I thought she might deny it, like she had so many times before. But then her shoulders slumped, and she let out this shaky breath, like she'd been holding it in for months. "It's not what you think," she whispered, but even as she said it, I could hear the lie crumbling in her voice. Rick, still catching his breath, didn't say a damn thing. He just stood there, staring at the floor, like maybe if he didn't look at me, this whole mess would disappear. But I wasn't about to let him off the hook either. "Start talking, Rick." I growled, my fist still clenched, blood still pumping with the adrenaline. "You think I'm blind? I've seen how you look at her. You really think I wouldn't figure it out?" Jess finally spoke up, her voice shaky but desperate. "It wasn't planned. Things got out of hand. I swear, it didn't start out like this." "Didn't start out like this? Then what was it, Jess? You gonna stand there and lie to my face?" She swallowed hard, her eyes glistening now. We've been messaging. I know it was wrong. I do, but it wasn't supposed to mean anything. It just happened. I felt the words hit me like another punch, but this one straight to the gut. Messaging. I repeated, my voice hard and cold. What kind of messaging? Don't bullshit me. She looked down, her lips trembling. It got intimate. Pictures, words. It got out of hand before I could stop it. Rick shifted again, still not saying a damn word, but the guilt was all over him too. Jess wasn't the only one sending messages. They both were. And it wasn't just friendly banter. And that day, I pressed, not letting either of them off the hook. That day you went over to his place with his girl. What really happened? Jess's eyes flickered with shame, her voice barely above a whisper now. He kissed me. There was the truth I'd been waiting for, but somehow, hearing it out loud made everything feel even worse. Maybe it was the storm. Maybe the chaos outside had stirred something primal in both of them, something wild and uncontrollable, like animals driven by instinct instead of reason. But the truth is that adrenaline-fueled madness didn't bring Jess and me closer together. If anything, it pushed her further away, right into Rick's arms. That night didn't unite us against the storm. It just revealed the cracks that had been there all along, widening them until there was no way to close them anymore. Standing there in Rick's living room, after hearing her admit it, hearing her say out loud that he had kissed her, that they'd been sending messages and God knows what else, I knew our marriage was doomed. There was no coming back from this. I could feel it deep in my bones, like something had shifted permanently between us. All those moments I ignored, all those bells I should have listened to, they'd led to this. And now it was too late. Anger boiled up in me, mixing with the betrayal, the hurt, the exhaustion from the storm, until I couldn't keep it inside anymore. I looked at both of them. Jess, the woman I had built a life with, and Rick, the man who had destroyed it. And I couldn't stand the sight of either of them. I don't want to see either of you, I said, my voice cold, shaking with the fury I was barely containing. Get out, both of you. Just get the hell out of my sight. Jess's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't say anything. Maybe she knew there was no point in trying to explain anymore. Maybe she realized in that moment just how far gone we were. Rick, for his part, stayed silent, bruised and bloody, still catching his breath. He didn't try to argue, didn't try to smooth things over. He just nodded, a defeated look on his face. A little while later, they left. Jess, Rick, and the kids. They evacuated, leaving me alone in the house we had called home. The wind outside was starting to pick up again, but it didn't matter. I barely felt it, and that's when it hit me. That's why Rick had stayed behind at the start of the storm. It wasn't some stubborn decision to tough it out like I thought. He stayed because of Jess. He stayed for her because somewhere in all of this chaos, they had found something in each other. Something that had pulled them closer while it tore us apart. So there I was, alone in the house, with nothing but the storm outside and the wreckage of my marriage inside. The storm wasn't the thing that had ruined everything. It was just the final push that made all the cracks impossible to ignore. So here I am, sitting in this house with the storm still raging outside. It's funny, really, after everything that's happened, the storm doesn't even feel like the real disaster anymore. The real wreckage is what's left inside, in the space where my marriage used to be. But somehow, writing this all down feels like the first step toward picking up the pieces. I wasn't sure why I started writing, maybe just to make sense of it all. Maybe to give myself something to focus on that wasn't the wind rattling the windows or the echoes of what went down with Jess and Rick. But as I put the words on the page, I've realized something. I feel lighter. Like maybe I've let go of some of that weight I've been carrying. The truth is, this marriage is over. It's been falling apart for a while, but I was too blind, too stubborn to admit it. Now, with everything out in the open, it's clear what needs to happen next. When this storm finally ends, when the winds die down and the sun comes out again, I'm going to move forward. I've already made the decision. I'm going to divorce Jess. I haven't talked to her about it yet. Hell, I haven't even seen her since they evacuated with Rick. But I don't think there's anything left to say. I think we both know where we stand. Sometimes things fall apart so completely that there's no way to put them back together. And that's okay. Maybe we were holding on to something that wasn't there anymore. The storm outside will pass, and when it does, I'll be ready to move on. I'll be ready to start over. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe. New cheating wife stories tomorrow.